There are truths so unsettling that most of us would rather close our eyes than face them. Among the darkest of these is a theory that was never meant for comfort, but for confrontation. The theory of stupidity, proposed by the German philosopher and theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer. It is not merely about ignorance. It is not about intelligence or lack thereof. It is something far more dangerous, more corrosive, and more terrifying. The idea that stupidity, once it takes root in the human soul, is a greater threat to society than evil itself. Evil, Bonhoeffer argued, always carries within it the seeds of its own destruction. It is cunning, it is deceitful, it manipulates, but it is always aware of what it is. Evil knows itself, it knows what it wants, it knows it is breaking the rules of morality, but stupidity is different. Stupidity is blind. It does not recognize itself as wrong. It does not question itself. Instead, it cloaks itself in the illusion of righteousness. It shouts loudly, it echoes endlessly, and it spreads like wildfire through the collective mind of a crowd. And that is why stupidity is more dangerous than evil. Because while evil can be unmasked, stupidity hides in plain sight, convinced that it is wisdom. Think about it. A stupid person does not merely act wrongly. They cannot even perceive that they are acting wrongly. They are immune to logic, to evidence, to correction. You cannot reason with stupidity because stupidity is not a defect of the mind. It is a corruption of the will. It is not about how much a person knows, but about whether they choose to surrender their thinking to the herd, to propaganda, to blind faith in authority. And once they surrender, they become instruments, not of themselves, but of forces that use their stupidity as a weapon. Bonhoeffer lived and died during one of the darkest chapters of human history, Nazi Germany. He saw with his own eyes how millions of otherwise ordinary people, not inherently evil, became complicit in horrors because they refused to think. They laughed when they were told to laugh, they hated when they were told to hate, and they killed when they were told to kill. These were not masterminds of cruelty. These were not even villains. They were something worse. They were stupid in the most terrifying sense of the word, minds so dulled by conformity and fear that they became vessels for evil greater than themselves. And here lies the most chilling part of Bonhoeffer's theory. Stupidity is not an individual problem. It is a social disease. It emerges most violently when people are isolated, stripped of real responsibility, and absorbed into mass movements. The more powerless people feel, the more likely they are to surrender their ability to think critically. The crowd becomes their brain, the slogans become their thoughts, the propaganda becomes their truth. Stupidity, then, is not born out of a lack of intelligence, but out of a deliberate decision to stop thinking for oneself. But if stupidity is this powerful, what can be done against it? Can you fight it? Bonhoeffer's answer was bleak. You cannot fight stupidity with arguments. Logic is useless against it. Data, evidence, reasoning, they all bounce off stupidity like arrows against armor. To argue with stupidity is to waste breath, because stupidity is not defeated by thought. It can only be dismantled by liberation. The only cure is freedom. Only when the chains of fear and manipulation are broken can people begin to think again. And here is where the theory turns terrifying for us today. Look around the world. How many of us believe we are thinking freely, when in reality we are simply repeating the slogans we've been fed? How many of us mistake noise for truth, popularity for wisdom, or certainty for clarity? How many of us laugh with the crowd while something inside whispers that the laughter is hollow? We live in an age of endless voices, endless media, endless persuasion, and Bonhoeffer would warn us. The more information surrounds you, the easier it is to be stupid, not because you know less, but because you refuse to question more. The frightening reality is that stupidity thrives in numbers. A single stupid individual can be ignored, even pitied. But when stupidity becomes collective, it becomes unstoppable. It shapes politics. It rewrites history. It silences dissent. It marches under banners of virtue and justice, while spreading destruction in its wake. The crowd laughs, the crowd cheers, the crowd condemns, and in that roar, the individual mind dies. That is the tragedy of stupidity. It is not simply a personal weakness, but a force of history. Bonhoeffer himself paid the ultimate price for refusing to surrender to this collective stupidity. He spoke out against the Nazi regime, he resisted, he refused to laugh with the crowd, and for that, he was executed. His words were written not in theory, but in blood. His theory of stupidity was not academic, it was survival. And yet it remains alive today, echoing across generations as a warning we are still too afraid to hear. The terrifying question we must ask ourselves is not, are there stupid people out there? That is too easy. The question is, where does stupidity live in me? Where have I surrendered my ability to think? Where do I parrot what I have been told without reflection, without doubt, without courage? Stupidity, Bonhoeffer reminds us, is not their problem. It is ours. It is not locked in the past. It is waiting, always, to rise again in the present. And so, the next time you hear the roar of the crowd, the next time you feel the pull of easy answers, the next time you are tempted to laugh when everyone laughs and shout when everyone shouts, pause. Ask yourself, am I thinking or am I simply echoing? Because the difference may decide not only the fate of your soul, but the fate of an entire society. Bonhoeffer's terrifying truth is this: humanity does not fall because of evil alone. It falls because stupidity lets evil in, cheers for it, and calls it good. And that is the theory you were never meant to hear, because once you hear it, you can never unhear it. The most unsettling dimension of Bonhoeffer's insight is that stupidity does not simply appear out of nowhere. It is cultivated. It is grown like a crop, watered by fear, harvested by those who hunger for power. Evil regimes and corrupt leaders have always understood this. You do not need to make people evil in order to control them. You only need to make them stupid. What does this mean? It means encouraging them not to think. It means distracting them with empty entertainment, drowning them in slogans, rewarding them for obedience, and punishing them for doubt. The less people question, the easier they are to command. The less they reflect, the easier they are to manipulate. And soon you do not need to control their thoughts because they have stopped thinking altogether. They will defend the very forces that enslave them. They will laugh at those who resist. They will persecute anyone who dares to step outside the circle of their manufactured truth. Bonhoeffer saw this unfold in Germany, a people who considered themselves educated, cultured, and civilized, yet who became instruments of unspeakable horror. They were not monsters. They were ordinary men and women who allowed stupidity to possess them. They did not need to be forced into evil. They walked willingly into it, with smiles on their faces, convinced they were serving a higher good. That is why stupidity is terrifying, because it does not look like a monster. It looks like your neighbor. It looks like your friend. It looks like the crowd cheering in the square, the colleagues repeating the slogans, the family members nodding along. It is not an alien force. It is us when we surrender our minds. And stupidity is seductive. It relieves you of the burden of responsibility. It tells you, don't think, just follow. Don't question, just obey. Don't search, just believe. And in exchange, it promises belonging. It promises safety. It promises the sweet comfort of being one with the herd. To resist is painful. To stand alone is frightening. To think for yourself is dangerous. That is why so few do it. That is why stupidity triumphs. Yet Bonhoeffer's words also carried a hidden challenge. If stupidity cannot be defeated by argument, if it cannot be destroyed by logic, then the only battlefield left is the soul. It is only through reclaiming our inner freedom that stupidity can be weakened. To think courageously in a world that punishes thought is to commit an act of rebellion. To remain awake when the masses are asleep is to place yourself in danger. But it is also the only path to preserving your humanity. And perhaps that is the most haunting lesson of all, that stupidity is not neutral. It is not harmless. It is complicity. To surrender your mind is to open the door to evil. To stop thinking is not simply laziness, it is betrayal. And when enough people betray thought, civilizations collapse. Ask yourself, how often do you mistake conformity for truth? How often do you dismiss a difficult question just because it makes you uncomfortable? How often do you repeat the words of others without truly examining them? These are the small, daily steps into the abyss of stupidity. Not grand choices, not dramatic betrayals, but tiny surrenders, one after another, until you no longer recognize yourself. The danger is not in the few who are openly evil. The danger is in the millions who stop thinking and allow evil to pass through them like a current. The bureaucrats stamping papers, the guard following orders, the citizens silencing their doubts. Evil is terrifying, but predictable. Stupidity is terrifying because it is limitless. This is why Bonhoeffer's theory was never meant to be comfortable. It was meant to be a warning. The warning that the gravest threat to any society is not the tyrant, not the criminal, not even the corrupt, but the silent, smiling, obedient stupidity of the majority. The moment we trade thought for comfort, courage for safety, truth for belonging, we become the very instruments of the darkness we fear. And so the question remains, will you think? Or will you laugh with the crowd, blind to the abyss beneath your feet? There is something far more terrifying than hatred, more corrosive than greed, more destructive than malice. It is the slow surrender of the human mind to stupidity. Bonhoeffer's theory is not simply an abstract warning, not merely a reflection of his own tragic time. It is a mirror held before humanity itself, showing us the disease that will return again and again until we finally have the courage to confront it. Stupidity, as Bonhoeffer saw, is not weakness of intellect, but paralysis of the soul. A person can be educated, skilled, even brilliant in their field, and yet if they refuse to think independently, they fall prey to it. That is why stupidity is not the opposite of intelligence. It is the enemy of wisdom. It is the silent assassin of free thought. And its most terrifying feature is that it thrives best not in chaos, but in order. It grows not in anarchy, but in systems of control that disguise obedience as virtue. The stupid person believes they are free even as they tighten the chains around their own wrists. They laugh loudly, convinced their laughter is proof of happiness, when in truth it is only the echo of someone else's command. They rage fiercely, convinced their anger is noble, when in reality it is only the recycled hatred of propaganda. They speak boldly, convinced their words are original, when in reality they are only repeating phrases designed for them by powers they will never see. This is why stupidity is more terrifying than evil, because evil knows it is evil, but stupidity believes it is good. And once a society crosses the threshold where stupidity outweighs thought, the fall is inevitable. History has shown this again and again. The fall of empires, the rise of dictatorships, the eruption of wars, all are born not merely from the schemes of the wicked, but from the silence and compliance of the stupid. They are the fertile soil in which tyranny takes root. Without them, no tyrant could rise, no regime could last, no ideology could consume. But here is the horror Bonhoeffer forces us to face. Stupidity is not something that others suffer from. It is not out there. It is not limited to one nation, one era, or one political movement. It is here. It is now. It is in the way we surrender our attention to screens, in the way we parrot opinions without reflection, in the way we fear solitude and therefore drown ourselves in the noise of the crowd. It is in the way we avoid asking questions, because questions demand courage. It is in the way we mock truth seekers as radicals or conspiracists, while we ourselves refuse to examine the chains around us. Stupidity is not the disease of others. It is the temptation of us all. And perhaps that is what makes it so frightening, because you cannot see it when you are inside it. To be stupid, in Bonhoeffer's sense, is to be blind to your blindness. It is to be certain while knowing nothing. It is to be proud while empty. It is to be convinced of your righteousness while serving a darkness you do not recognize. And in this blindness, stupidity becomes almost invincible. You cannot shame it. You cannot persuade it. You cannot even awaken it, because it does not believe it is asleep. Bonhoeffer's conclusion was devastating. The only way to dismantle stupidity is not through argument, but through liberation. Only when a person regains true freedom, the freedom of responsibility, of conscience, of solitude, can they begin to think again. And this freedom does not come cheaply. It is not given by governments. It is not delivered by leaders. It must be claimed, fought for, and defended by the individual. Freedom begins when a single person dares to say, "I will not surrender my mind. I will not echo the crowd. I will not laugh when I do not find it funny. I will not hate when I do not see the enemy. I will not obey when obedience means betrayal." That act, small as it may seem, is the seed of resistance. Because stupidity thrives in the silence of the many, but it trembles in the defiance of the few. The martyr, the dissident, the solitary thinker, they are the enemies of stupidity. They stand as living proof that the human soul is not completely conquered. Bonhoeffer himself became one of these martyrs, executed by a regime that demanded stupidity from the masses and obedience unto death. And yet his words survived. His warning survived. His truth survived. The terrifying question that lingers is whether we will hear it, whether we will allow ourselves to be pierced by it, whether we will stop pointing outward and begin to examine inward. Because the line between wisdom and stupidity does not run between nations or parties or ideologies. It runs through each of us. Every day in small choices, we either strengthen our minds or surrender them. Every day we either choose thought or abandon it. And the sum of those choices decides not only the fate of our lives, but the fate of our world. The theory of stupidity is not a relic of the past. It is not a warning for other people. It is the nightmare standing right behind us, waiting for us to look away. Bonhoeffer's haunting words remind us that human beings may survive the attacks of evil, but they will not survive the betrayal of their own minds. So ask yourself in the silence of your own soul, am I awake or am I laughing with the crowd? Am I free or have I surrendered my thoughts to the herd? And most of all, when the time comes, will I think or will I obey? Because in that moment, the fate of everything depends not on the strength of evil, but on whether stupidity has claimed us. And that is the most terrifying truth of all.